Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you could make it back for another round of Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. It's so good to see all of you around the fire. I hope your week's been mild. I hope the things you intend to achieve have been achieved. And I pray that you're having the best life imaginable. Today on Cozy Horror, we're going to talk about monsters. Monsters, both real and maybe created. But, we'll get there. Starting us out, we're going to hear about a monster that lives in the blood. A curse passed down from generation to generation. A curse they call a Legnart.
It was something of an open secret in my family. A secret that could get you killed if you weren't prepared. In my family, there are always very specific rules about certain things. We cut our meat very small. We don't drink too fast. We don't go into water deeper than our waist. And we don't put our face in the water when we do. It's something you come to understand pretty quickly, or you don't live very long. I remember losing breath for the first time when I was 6, and it scared the hell out of me. It was a simple thing, but those are usually the things that trip us up. I had been out playing in the yard, the July heat beating down on me, and I was sweating profusely as I came pelting up to the hose pipe to the house. I should have gone inside to get a drink. Mom had told me that 1,000 times, but I was so thirsty. The water was cold and nice at first, running down my face as I took long drinks. I was guzzling before I knew it, drinking like a dog as my tongue stuck out. And that was when it happened. Suddenly I was coughing, gagging, but the more I coughed, the harder it became to breathe. It wasn't like I couldn't catch my breath. I felt like someone had their hands around my throat, and they were choking the life out of me. I was scared. A child of 6 isn't supposed to be scared like that. And as the little black spots started appearing in front of my eyes, I started to see something. It was like looking at a photo-negative person, an outline made real. It had long, spindly fingers, 3 times as long as a normal person's, and it had them wrapped around my neck as it throttled me. All I could do was look up at it, watching as it shook me slowly and firmly by the throat. I was blacking out, slowly dying in the clutches of this monster. But that's when I heard someone screaming from behind me, "A Legnarts, a Legnarts, a Legnarts." Just as quickly as it appeared, the creature was gone again. It had broken apart like smoke on a breeze, and my mother was holding me as I lay in her arms. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I told you to be careful. You always have to be careful. The Legnarts is always waiting to get you." Back then, I didn't even think to ask her what the creature was. I was a child. Children believe in monsters. We don't question whether there are monsters or not. We question when they will come for us, or if we will be prepared. My mother had saved me, but she had also taught me how to save myself. I was lucky that day. Some members of our family are not so lucky when the Legnarts comes for them. Despite the curse that followed us, I had a few siblings, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, neither of whom made it to adulthood. I had 2 older siblings, Sam and Gabrielle, and 2 younger siblings, Nikki and Matthew, a boy and a girl of each. I was what you would call a middle child, but I wouldn't be for long. Their deaths were too much for my father. He died before I finished high school, but my mother lived on. It was like she couldn't allow herself to die, knowing that she had to protect her children. Then, just her child. Me. My sister was the first to go. She was older than me, 2 years older, and we often played together. I don't think she believed in this creature, but she had always been lucky. She didn't have a chance to see it, like I did. But when I was 8 and she was 10, she died very suddenly. I'm not sure if she believed then, but I believe that she saw the Alegnarts before she went. Mom was busy that day. My baby brother was less than a year old, and he needed a lot of care. My sister and I were home. My older brother was out with friends, and my younger sister was at our aunt's house with her daughter for a play date. And we were sitting around the house being bored. We were watching cartoons, lying on the couch, when we heard a sound that all children hope for. It was the gentle music of an ice cream truck. We both got excited, running to our rooms to see if we had any money, and we were out the door before our mother could even think to stop us. She was in the back, trying to get Matthew to sleep, and when the truck pulled up to the curb, we made our orders. Gabby got a bomb pop, and I got a Choco Crunch. I was eating slowly, taking my time as Mother had taught us to, but Gabby was excited. She had wanted a bomb pop all summer, but the ice cream truck didn't come down here very often. She was practically dancing on the sidewalk, dropping the wrapper beside the curb as the truck drove slowly up the road and away from us. She took a big bite, getting almost the entire tip of the bomb pop in one giant chomp, and I saw as her throat worked in an attempt to get it all down. She wheezed, her air cutting off as the ice cream bulged her throat. I got scared, watching her hands scrabble at her throat as she tried to breathe, and as her eyes got wide, I saw something in them that made me remember that day 2 years before. She was seeing it, the Alegnarts, and it was proving itself much more lively than she had believed it could. I couldn't see it, but I watched as something took hold of her throat. It pressed the sides of her neck, breaking the ice cream and sending it sliding down even as her windpipe was closed off by those treacherous fingers. A paramedic would later claim that the ice cream must have melted enough to slide down the rest of the way, but I knew what I had seen. I'd seen those fingers as they made indentions on her throat. I had seen her look of terror as it killed her. I stood there, fear gripping me like those fingers, and tried to make my lips speak its name. That's where my mom found us, me still trying to speak, and Gabrielle already dead in the street. I never forgot that day, the day I watched my sister die. It was something that stuck with me for the rest of my life. Sam went next, but it wasn't entirely due to a lack of caution. Sam, like me, had experienced something at a very young age, and he had seen the Alegnarts before our mother had made it go away. It had made him incredibly cautious. Sam didn't take chances. He cut his meat fine enough to eat without teeth. He drank most liquids with a straw, and he never took a bite big enough to choke him. He took showers. He didn't go into water that went over his knees, and he didn't put his face in the water. No, what killed Sam was his work ethic. He was 4 years older than me, and when I was 12, he got a job. He worked nights, wanting to buy a car, and he worked almost every day after school. He was coming home on his bike one night, going over the bridge that would take him into the residential area where we lived, when a drunk driver came over the bridge and hit him. He fell off his bike, flying over the side of the bridge and into the water. The water wasn't deep. It was barely 4 feet, but when they pulled him out, the coroner was puzzled. "I know he must have drowned, but it almost appears that he was strangled." He had shown Mom the bruises, and though she said it sounded dreadful, I could see in her eyes that she knew. I was 12 when she took me aside and told me that I was the oldest now. "Your younger siblings need you now more than ever. Never forget that it's up to us to keep an eye on them, to keep them safe from the Alegnarts before he strikes again." "That's just a story," I blurted out before I could think better of it. My mom shook her head at me. "If you believe that, then I'll be having this discussion with your younger sister soon. You know better. You watched it kill Gabby. You saw it when it tried to kill you. Believe in this, and be cautious in everything you do." "But why?" I asked. "Why does it follow us?" "It's always followed the members on my side of the family. It's what killed your grandfather, 2 of your aunts, and both of your uncles. It nearly killed your Aunt Stacy, but I stopped it. It's followed us since the old country, ever since your great-great-great-grandfather did something unforgivable." We were sitting in the living room after Sam's funeral, still dressed in our Sunday best, and it occurred to me that this was the same room Gabby and I were sitting in when we heard the ice cream truck. That seemed like a million years ago now, not just 4, and I felt an odd sense of vertigo as I thought about it. Your thrice great-grandfather was a lumberman in Russia. He was respected. He was a pillar of the community. But the only thing he wanted was beyond his reach. He desired a woman who would not have him. He became desperate, so he went to speak with a bruja, a witch that lived on the outskirts of the village. He told the witch what he wanted, and she told him the price would be steep. He was a man of means, and he paid what she asked. She gave him potions and charms and spoke the words of mysticism, but none of it worked. The woman spurned his advances, and when he told the witch, she shook her head at him and said, "Then it's not meant to be. If your stars cannot be entangled, then they cannot. There's nothing to be done about it." He became irate, telling her that she would give him his money back if she couldn't get him what he wanted. She told him that could not be, that he had paid and taken his chances. Your great-great-great-grandfather became irate, and what he did next could not be taken back. He leapt across the table, knocking her crystals and baubles to the ground, and wrapped his fingers around her throat. He throttled her right there at her table, watching her face purpling, but the witch was not done yet. They say her lips never stopped moving, even as he strangled the life from her. And though he could not hear the words, he would remember them later. Alegnarts, Alegnarts, Alegnarts. She repeated them again and again, even as he strangled the life from her. He felt his own throat closing a little as the rage took him. When he finished, he let go of her and stepped back. He realized what he had done, and he sure was sorry, but there was no taking it back. Unknown to him, the witch had thrown her death curse on him, and it followed his bloodline for the rest of time. The Alegnarts follows us now, just waiting for the opportunity to squash us. It killed all but one of your great-great-grandfather's children, and your great-great-grandfather's children, and so on and so forth. It would have left only me, I suppose, but I saved your aunt, and have kept a close eye on her ever since. I told her husband about the legend, and now he watches her so I don't have to. That's why you have to help me watch your siblings, so it doesn't happen to them." And so I did. I watched over Nikki and Matthew like they were made of glass. and that's why they nearly made it to adulthood. Matthew was about 4 years younger than me, Nikki too, and it was strange to think of what they might get up to if given the opportunity. It didn't matter. I watched them like a hawk. I hovered over them ceaselessly, and though I think they resented it, they also understood. I stopped Matthew from choking on spaghetti when he was 9. I stopped Nikki from drowning in the kiddie pool when she was 11. I stopped Matthew from choking on a soda when he was 12. I stopped Nikki from choking on ice when she was 13. It was a full-time job, but thinking of Gabby made it easier. I had to save them, like I should have saved her. And it worked, until Nikki suddenly went off script. She wanted to go to the beach with her class in the 10th grade. Nikki, I don't think it's a good idea. I was 20 then, still living at home and watching after them. Nikki was 16 and Matthew was 14, and Dad had been dead for nearly 3 years. It was a heart attack. There had been a close call with Nikki, and she had nearly died after an accident with an allergic reaction to cigarette smoke. He had collapsed during it and never gotten back up again. After that, I was even more attentive, watching for Dad and me, and it seemed like just the chance that the Alegnarts had been looking for. Well, I'm tired of never doing anything fun. I want to live a little. I'll be fine. Don't worry so much. Well, what if I chaperone the trip? What if I... No, she said, but she said it gently. I have to be responsible for myself sometime, even if it's just for a little while. My mother and I tried to talk sense into her, but she wouldn't listen. She went on the trip, telling us that she would be fine, but I went anyway. I watched from binoculars from my car, keeping a close eye on her as she splashed and played. I was too slow to save her, though. Too far away. She washed up an hour after the riptide got her. And then it was just me and Matthew. Matthew almost made it. He was so close. 17 and on the cusp of graduation. He had become like Sam, careful in the extreme. He saw the writing on the wall, had seen the Alegnarts many times, more times than he could count, and intended to beat the odds. He went nowhere. He came straight home, and he seemed to be certain that if he could make it to adulthood, he might beat the odds. He was sure of it, and as his 18th birthday approached, I kept an extra close eye on him. He was never far from my sight. We went everywhere together, and Mom commended me for my determination. I'd failed Nikki. I couldn't fail Matt. In the end, I never had a chance. We were watching TV, something mindless, when Matt got up and went to the bathroom. I got up too, but he shook his head, saying that he'd only be gone for a second. He needed to pee. It wasn't life-threatening. He went to the hall bathroom, and a moment later, I heard the toilet flush. I heard the water come on. I heard it go off. Then I heard a thump that had me running right away. He was sprawled on the ground, clutching at his throat and gasping for air. "Alegnarts, Alegnarts, Alegnarts," I cried, not wasting time looking for fingers as I acted quickly. Nothing happened. "Alegnarts, Alegnarts, Alegnarts," I cried again. But still nothing. I called for Mom, but she was out back hanging laundry, and wouldn't discover that her youngest was dead until it was too late. I tried CPR, but his chest wouldn't rise. I checked for finger marks, but there were none. Nothing was squeezing his neck, I would later find out. What had happened was just bad luck. He'd slipped on the floor mat and hit his throat just right, so that his windpipe was crushed. It was a 1 in a million injury, but it didn't stop the family curse from being fulfilled. So I stood there and held his hand, being with him as he died. He was scared. God, he was scared, but I gave him all the love and all the support that I could pass on. After that, it was just Mom and I. But I've decided that it ends with me. I'm scheduled for a vasectomy next month. I do not intend to have children that I will then have to also watch die. Mom didn't understand. She was furious at first, but I think she gets it now. If I never procreate, then the curse ends with me. If I have to remain celibate or become a priest or something, then that's what I'll do. Either way, there will never be another target for the Alegnarts. And so, he will strangle out, as he has strangled out my bloodline. It seems the least I can do to honor the siblings that I couldn't save.
Sometimes the worst monsters are the ones we inflict upon each other. Moving right along, we have a creepy creature that lives on an island and maybe draws people to him, so he's got a little company. Let's hear a little bit more about a getaway.
Liz couldn't really say she didn't know why she was here, but she could question why. Why a wise and just God would leave her here was beyond her, and if this was his plan, she wasn't sure of his wisdom. She could see him standing in the shadow of the palm trees, eyes red like a dog caught in the flash of a camera. All it did was stare, but she felt as if it wasn't all it intended to do. The trip had been one they'd planned for years, a girls' trip to the Bahamas, just her and her old sorority sisters, on a cruise for 5 sun-soaked days. Liz had been looking forward to it. It'd be nice to get out of the house for a while. Her BA in administration had mostly made a great dust catcher in the last 8 years since her graduation. Between the kids, the house, and her husband, and her call center job that she did to bring in a little spending money, she had little time for anything else. Well, that wasn't entirely true. Liz had contented herself with talking with her old sorority sisters, Janet, Claudia, and Maria, about their lives and what they'd all been up to. Janet wrote for a food blog, she and her husband jet-setting around as he ran his export business, and Liz loved to hear about all the foreign places she found herself in. Claudia was a lawyer, always the brains of the bunch, and Liz often celebrated with her over the computer about her courtroom victories. Maria was a designer in New York, and Liz would be lying if she didn't admit that she grudgingly lived vicariously through her bestie. Maria lived like one of the girls on Sex and the City, with a constant diet of different men, different gigs, and different problems that seemed to fix themselves before they got out of hand. Liz's life, in contrast, was pretty mundane. Her friends gushed appreciatively over the pictures of her kids, none of them having any, but it was clear that their admiration was mostly lip service. They were out living spectacular lives, while Liz was stuck in the gilded cage with her eggs. She was comfortable. Harold was a good man who took care of the bills and gave her whatever she wanted. She loved her kids dearly, but watching her friends as they went about their lives made her feel like hers was going nowhere. As she sat beside the fire, alone and watching the red-eyed creature, she now wished that she had stayed in her comfortable rut. When she had told Harold about the trip, his only real concern had been who would watch the kids. Harold was a dutiful husband, but he reminded her of an old song her mother had liked. She couldn't remember the name, but her mother had played it on cassette as she cleaned the house. Harold reminded her of a line from the song, one her mother always sang in tones of deepest disgust, a line that embodied Harold as much as it embodied her own father. "I'll raise the children while you go have a beer. Where is my John Wayne? Where is his shining gun? Where's my lonely ranger? Where have all the cowboys gone?" It was a good line. It had encompassed her life so well. Harold was not the owner of an export business. He wasn't a model or a defense attorney who might be moved to sleep with her after a trial. Harold was an assistant manager in a company that made oil drilling equipment. He was nice enough. He was stable. But his interest in her had clearly waned. It had happened sometime after their second child. She saw his eyes began to wonder, and if he wasn't already having an affair, that his impending midlife crisis would surely drive him into one. She had assured him that her sister would watch the kids, while he was at work, but that he might have to miss his after-work bar trips this week. I'm sure she'll watch them on Saturday, though, so you can meet your associates at the links for your golf game. In retrospect, she thought he might have been a little too glad to hear how her sister, 19 and home from college, would be coming to sit with the kids. But that might just be in her head. The news that he could still golf on the weekends had softened his mood a bit. He even slipped her a few extra hundreds so she could fly to Orlando instead of driving. The idea that she might be stuck in traffic and miss her cruise was comforting now. But as she thought about the reunion with her friends, it brought a smile to her cracked lips. They had all met at the airport. First Liz and Maria, with Janet and Claudia flying in an hour later. The four had gone to dinner, drinking and talking about what they'd been doing, and finally boarded the boat at nightfall. They'd had a grand send-off with fireworks and champagne, and the four of them had talked excitedly about what they would do once they arrived in the Bahamas. "Hope your husbands gave you a day pass, ladies," Maria joked with Janet and Liz, "'cause you never know who you might meet on this trip." As Liz stared at the man-shaped thing, its unblinking eyes focused on her like twin beams. She wasn't sure that this was the someone that Maria had meant. It had all been smooth sailing until the second night. The four of them had drank at the bar, dined in the main hall, watched a few of the floor shows, and gone to bed thoroughly pleased. Maria had come in a little later, after leaving with a fella from the bar, and Liz wondered if she might pick up a fling of her own. She had turned red at the thought. Did she dare do such a thing? She didn't think she could, but who knew what a trip might bring? The second day had been spent around the pool. Liz was a little more self-conscious than the other three. She'd never quite gotten her figure back after her second child, but that didn't stop the eyes from finding her. They soaked up the sun, pretending to ignore the ogling eyes of those who looked, and Liz felt desired in a way that she hadn't since college. Harold did his duty at least once a week, but she'd come to suspect that that was out of habit. The men who looked at her and her friends seemed willing to do far more than their duty, and the thought made her smile as she watched them from behind her sunglasses. They had dressed in their best that night, their reservations at the captain's table being semi-formal, and Liz thought she might find herself in someone else's bed besides her own later. She was feeling confident in a way that she hadn't since she had met Harold, and as they laughed over drinks and appetizers, she wished the night would never end. When the ship stopped suddenly, groaning as if it had hit something, and lurching like a wild animal, she hoped she was asleep in her bunk still, her afternoon nap still ongoing. Now she knew better. As she felt her eyes getting heavy and heard the strange singing that had marked every evening after the first, she knew that the nightmare never ended. They started to evacuate soon after the sudden stop. The ship had run up against something, and it had shredded the side. Liz and her friends were shoved into a lifeboat with about a dozen others. They bobbed out into the night as the boat rode low in the water, its guts filling with the balmy island sea. Liz reflected that at least there had been enough boats for everyone, as the crewmen rowed them towards a collection of islands nearby. As Liz sat beside her friends, the adrenaline starting to ebb and the ocean rocking her amidst the warm bodies, she felt herself starting to drift off. You'd have said that such a thing was impossible, but she could hear others yawning and one particularly loud snorer behind her. She leaned her head against Maria and felt the other woman breathing heavily. It appeared Liz wasn't the only one getting tired, and as she drifted off, she thought she heard the first snatches of a song that would become very familiar. When she woke up, she found herself alone, the boat beached as the surf pushed it in and out amongst the sand of some unknown island. Liz had no idea how long she had been there, but the fact that she was alone filled her with a palpable dread. Where had everyone gone? Was she the only one left out of the 20 or so people in the boat? She got up, but immediately sat down as her sleeping legs refused to hold her. She tried to rub some of the feeling back into them, her hands as numb as her legs, and that was when she noticed the thing around her finger. It was a ring, woven from coconut fibers, and she couldn't remember seeing anything like it before. Where had it come from, and who had put it on her? It was tight on her finger, but Liz couldn't call it uncomfortable. It sat flush against her skin, and as she lifted it up to take a better look, she saw the creature for the first time. The island swam with fog, the trees and sand leading her to believe that it must be tropical. She had seen him in the mist, leaning against a palm tree as he stared at her. The two locked eyes, and she felt her skin crawl as he stared silently. It was as if they were the only two in existence, and the longer it went on, the less human he began to look. His arms became less human as they thickened and waxed and waned. Its legs appeared to double, then triple, and its head bulged oddly before returning to its normal dimensions. It was man-shaped, but certainly no man. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but when it turned its head suddenly, the spell was broken. She heard Maria calling her through the fog, and when she turned back to look, it was gone. "Glad you're finally awake," Maria said. "We got a little worried when you wouldn't wake up." How long was I out for?" Liz asked, getting shakily to her feet as the pins began to recede. "Nearly a whole day. We left 3 others out here with you. Did all of you wake up at the same time?" Liz shook her head as Maria took her arm and led her up the beach through the fog. "We've been trying to make something that will get the attention of ships or planes, but the fog is so thick I'm not sure anyone will see us. The rest of us have been trying to get some shelters up, but it's hard to find materials and all this." As they came through the fog, Liz could see that there were around 15 others milling about. Men, women, even a couple of kids went about their tasks without much enthusiasm. They looked at Liz disinterestedly as she and Maria approached, and Liz saw Janet and Claudia as they turned rocks into words so a plane might see them. They both waved as they walked over to them. The rest of the day was spent raising lean-tos and setting up fire pits. She met some of the others, her fellow castaways, and they seemed to have quite a mixed bag. There was Ben and his sister Catherine, Angela and her daughter Celeste, Margot, Roger, his boyfriend Francis, Tracy, who carried around a typewriter case with a manuscript inside, Gail, Kathy, and her son Gregory. They feasted on nuts and fruit, coconuts, and some little crabs that Ben and Francis had managed to scare up around dusk, and as they ate, the group discussed what they would do tomorrow. "It might be nice to take stock of the island," Ben said. "Find out if there are any others here." "A source of fresh water might be good, too," Maria put in, and Liz couldn't help but notice that she kept looking shyly at the older man as he agreed. Liz tried to keep up, but it was hard to focus on planning. It's hard to focus on anything with the pair of red eyes that stared at her from the nearby palm tree. No one else seemed to have noticed it, and the longer it stared, the more she realized that it was staring only at her. Whatever the creature was, it seemed to have eyes only for Liz, though the attention was far from flattering. Her finger itched, and Liz realized that it was the first time she had thought about the ring in a while. She wondered if it had been given to her while she slept. Why not just take her too, if it had gotten that close? As the others began to get comfortable, Liz watched the creature in the fog as it stood its lonely vigil, which was why she was still awake when the singing began. Liz didn't know where it came from, or whether it had anything to do with the mysterious voyeur, but she blinked a little too long and found the red eyes had gone when she was awake. She sat blinking, the sounds of snoring vibrating around her. The night was suddenly split by a heavy baritone. It rolled across the sleeping people, hitting Liz like the warm steam off a cup of tea. As she watched, a few of her fellow survivors staggered up, getting to their feet and walking towards the jungle. They moved like sleepwalkers, their legs taking them shakily into the fog. In the dark, Liz wasn't certain who it had been, but in the morning, there were 2 less than there had been the day before. She hadn't slept that night, but as the sun came up and turned the fog into a blanket of diamonds, she pretended to. The last thing she wanted was to answer questions about missing people. No one seemed to notice at first, but by noon the disappearance of 2 people was hard to ignore. Any idea where Roger and Francis are? Catherine asked, looking around like she might have just missed them. Off doing God knows what, I'm sure, Ben muttered, drawing some dark looks from a few of the others. He had made his displeasure at the pair of them pretty clear to everyone but them, and didn't seem to care about their disappearance too much. A couple of people talked about going to look for them, but it was finally decided that if they had gone off on their own, then they would either come back or they wouldn't. People went about their day, some looking for food, others trying to find planes or boats to hail. As the day spun out, Liz wondered if she should tell someone what she had seen the night before. She hadn't told anyone about the man-shaped thing in the jungle, and if it was the same thing taking people, maybe they needed to know. Her thoughts chased her throughout the day, but as the sun set and the fire cast sparks into the night sky, Liz found herself awake and searching for the creature. She hadn't had far to look. It had been there since dusk, just watching her as she sat by the fire. The fog was still a thick pea soup, and the image within it swelled and distorted as she kept an eye on it. Her head dipped and jittered as she tried to stay awake, but when the singing began tonight, it was like a sweet lullaby. She saw 3 shapes rise around her, the fire turning them into silhouettes against the sparks, and as they stumbled away from the dancing flame, she tried to call out to them, to raise some kind of an alarm. She was fading away as the deep, resonant voice drowned her amidst the crashing waves of the beach, however, and soon she found herself asleep. The camp awoke to find they were 10 now, and Liz discovered that one of the shades had been Claudia. Another had been Angela's daughter, and she was beside herself with grief. "Has anyone seen Celeste? She was right here next to me when I fell asleep last night." "We should go look for them," Maria suggested, looking pleadingly at Liz and Janet as she tried to move the others to go with her. Most didn't seem keen on going off into the mist to hunt for people who'd disappeared, especially if there was something out there taking them. Liz found it impossible not to be moved by Maria's words, though, and Janet seemed to feel the same. Claudia was their friend, and Celeste was just a child. The thought of them lost and scared in a strange place made Liz's heart ache, and the 3 assured Angela that they would try their best to find her daughter. She thanked them tearfully. The disappearance had left her in a state of grief so deep that she could do little but sit and rock as she cried. In the end, the 3 set out to search for those who had disappeared, and the others watched them leave, with not much expectation that they would see them again. The foliage smooshed wetly underfoot as they searched, the fog a constant blanket around them. The palms gave way to thin pines and wispy spruces that seemed to grow small, round nuts. The ground was far too wet to see much. Any footprints that might have existed were obliterated by the soupy ground, and as the 3 women searched the jungle, they found no trace of the missing people. Liz was no tracker, but in the movies there were always signs left behind when someone went missing in the woods. Fabric left on a tree, hair hanging from a branch, maybe a swatch of blood smeared across the bark. But there was none of that here. It was as if the island had swallowed them up, leaving nothing behind to mark their passage from life to death. The whole time, Liz felt like she was being followed. She glanced fitfully around as she looked for the man-shaped thing. She caught the odd glance of something, some vague shape amidst the mist, but it was impossible to tell if it was her voyeur or not. She felt pursued, this thing dogging her heels wherever she went, and she began to wonder if it was the thing that had summoned them to the island. Were they all just lunch for this creature? A game of cat and mouse to break up the monotony of its existence? When the sun began to set, they were forced to head back to camp empty-handed and heavy-hearted. Angela was inconsolable. The group came together for her, but their eyes were more often than not on the jungle. The fires were stoked, and as people began to get comfortable for sleep, Liz found herself too tired to join them. She had collapsed after they'd returned from the search, exhausted from all that walking, and her sleep had been heavy and dreamless. That night, Liz finally got to meet her mysterious watcher, and it likely saved them from another loss. It was late when she jerked awake, unsure how long she'd been asleep. The fire was burning low now, the ashes flickering into the sky as the logs crumbled beneath the assault of the heat. Liz thought at first that the waves had woken her up, but as she glanced into the gathering shadow, she could see those red eyes as they bore into her. They were closer now, maybe 15 feet away, but Liz was finding it harder and harder to be terrified of her mysterious watcher. The longer she sat looking at those red eyes, the more curious Liz found herself. "Hello?" she asked, keeping her voice low so as not to wake anyone up. The red eyes blinked, unsure, but when a voice answered her, it was very different from the deep baritone she'd heard singing at night. "Hello," it answered, its voice unsure as its features remained unknowable from behind the thick fog. Do you live here?" Liz asked, feeling foolish almost at once. It had been here since before they got here. Of course it lived here. "Yes, for most of my life, I think." The two talked for a bit, Liz becoming more comfortable the longer it didn't simply leap on her and gobble her up. It confirmed her suspicions that the island wasn't boundless and that her group of survivors were the only people here. She asked about the fog, and it told her that it just always was here, but that it kept everything nice and cool, so it wasn't unwelcome. It would have amazed her how quickly she fell into a normal conversation with this creature if she hadn't been so absolutely exhausted. As it stood, it seemed like the most natural thing to have happened in a while. "Are you the one singing at night?" she asked after it finished telling her about the caves near the edge of the island. It was beginning to lighten on the horizon, and Liz realized that it might leave before she got some of her burning questions answered. The eyes had been crinkling a little as it spoke, clearly enjoying their talk, but as she asked about the song, they took a different downturn. Was it mistrust, or was he ashamed of the answer? "Yes, that's me," he answered, clearly hesitant. Are you the one—" "Liz?" someone said sleepily, and Liz turned to see Maria sitting up groggily. Who are you talking to?" Liz turned back to introduce Maria to the thing she'd been so comfortably chatting with, but it was gone. "No one. Must have been talking in my sleep," Liz answered. There were no new missing people in the morning, but it did little to help the tension. Ben had started talking about making spears or something to defend themselves, but most of the others were more concerned with surviving. Even so, the foragers took homemade spears he had made when they went to look for food. His sister Catherine tried to talk to him, telling him that he was making everyone anxious, but he loudly told her that everyone should be worried about whatever was taking people in the night. Angela looked like a ghost as she sat looking at the waves, and people seemed content to give her space. She was mourning the loss of her daughter, and it was unclear whether her tears were swelling the ocean or the ocean was rushing forward to give her its salt. Liz found herself thinking about the odd creature as she went about her day. It hadn't been like she had expected, and she found herself wondering if it had really been the one taking people. She still hadn't told anyone about it, and most of the others would have assumed that she was going crazy. The thought of those red eyes creeping up to talk to her in the night would have scared some of them and made others think that she was losing it. Worse yet, she suspected that Ben would stay up and try to fight it if she told him, so she kept her mysterious new friend to herself. For the next week, she would stay up after the fire burned low and meet with it. She didn't hear the singing on those nights, and the red eyes seemed more than happy to come back night after night so they could learn more about her. Whatever it was, it seemed very interested in Liz and the life she had lived on the mainland. They talked about boats and cars and television, the food she used to eat, the people she'd known, her family, anything else the creature could think of. Liz would find herself watching him as his body did strange things, thickening and shriveling, multiplying and dividing, and the longer she watched it, the less afraid she became. The longer they talked, the less substantial it seemed to become, and that worried her. Liz found that she was afraid of losing it, the thing that made her feel almost normal. The mist seemed to clutch at it, making its features even less recognizable, and it added a level of unreality to it. It made it seem as if it were fading away. "Can I tell you a secret?" it said suddenly, leaning in close one night and causing Liz to blink as the fog pattered against her face. Sure, she said, glad for a break in conversation. Liz had been worried that she might run out of things to talk about, and then it would go away. She'd forgotten to be afraid of it, and was glad for the company and the attention this thing showed her after everyone else had gone to sleep. She missed her family and her children most of all, but having it here to talk to made it a little easier, a little more tolerable. When you first noticed me, I had come to watch you. Me? Liz asked, surprised. Why me? I noticed you when your boat came. You were just sitting there, sleeping, and I couldn't take my eyes off you. That's why I gave you the ring. Liz had been struggling with the conflicting nature of being both uncomfortable at the idea of this thing watching her and strangely flattered by its attention. When was the last time anyone had paid that sort of attention to her? Certainly not at home. Certainly not since she left college and started her descent into wedded bliss. She jumped a little when he mentioned the ring, having almost forgotten about it until right then. Sometimes she would go all day without thinking about it, and then it would suddenly catch on something, or the scratchy fibers would peel at her skin like steel wool, and she would remember that it was there. You gave me the ring? She asked, watching its head wobble oddly. I did, and though it sounded like it wanted to say more, it was unsure how to proceed. I don't know what to say, Liz said, knowing exactly what she wanted to say, but unsure if she could ask. The two sat in silence for a few minutes, just listening to the waves break on the beach as they stared at each other. Why don't you ever sing any more? Liz asked suddenly, causing the eyes to back up a little bit. They backed further away, getting closer to the tree line, but still unable to look away from Liz. Why don't you sing any more? She asked again, and this time it sounded like an accusation. He was almost 30 feet away, but Liz still heard him when he whispered the secret he'd longed to keep hidden. Because I don't want to hurt you, but I'm so hungry. As the sun came up, dispelling some of the fog, Liz was left with nothing but her confusion of mismatched feelings. Whatever he was, he managed to hold out for another 3 days. Liz didn't see him again until the third night, and that was when she heard the singing. Liz had thrown herself into any task she could find, trying to take her mind off of him. She wasn't exactly sure when he had gone from it to a him, but the transition made her wary. She'd been working to leave the island, wanting to return to the life she'd known, but now her tasks seemed so pointless. Maria had started lighting fires along the coast in an attempt to get the attention of a passing ship. Janet wanted to make a map of the island, something they could use to explore deeper for supplies. Ben wanted to find better shelter in case the weather changed. Gail wanted to try to find out if they could see the shipwreck at some point on the island, so they could get their bearings. Tracy just wanted to sit and work on her manuscript, and the others seemed content to just exist here until it was all over. It all seemed very trivial to Liz. Despite this, she threw herself into anything that came her way, whether it was scouring the island for resources, looking for somewhere to move the group, or just feeding fuel to the multiple signal fires. All the while, she could feel the eyes of her admirer as they followed her. She never saw him lurking in the mist, but she could sense his presence. He kept his distance, watching her from afar, and Liz was worried that she had offended him. She had suspected that he was the one luring people away, but she hadn't really understood the implication until he'd spelled them out for her. They would never find their fellow survivors, no matter how much they searched, and it was strange to feel so attached to someone who saw you as food. Angela had disappeared on the second day, but Liz doubted that her new friend had anything to do with it. Angela had done little else but weep for 2 days, the sea drinking her tears greedily. She wouldn't eat or drink, wouldn't come to camp no matter what the time, and when they woke up to find her stretch of beach had gone empty, Liz assumed that she had just wandered out into the sea. It might have been the kindest thing for her, but Ben had other ideas. With only 9 of them, Ben and Gail were now carrying clubs and accompanied anyone who left the camp to forage. They had appointed themselves as de facto guardians of the camp, and Ben seemed to have decided that he was their leader. He and Catherine argued often, but his patience for her seemed to be running thin. Kathy and Gregory had taken to sleeping close to Liz and her friends, and Kathy kept a protective arm around her son at all times. Tracy slept with her arms around her typewriter case, holding it like someone might a stuffed animal, but even she had moved closer to the group for protection. When Catherine came to join them on the third night, they all slept in a shallow pile, like rabbits in a warren. Ben and Gale sat around the fire, blinking owlishly as they kept watch. But to Liz, it began to feel more like a prison camp than a group of survivors. Liz woke up on the third night to the sound of singing. She found herself looking for those piercing red eyes amongst the fog, and found his shadowy body not too far away. Dark forms imposed themselves across her vision, and she watched them lumber into the trees before realizing what had actually woken her. It was only Ben by the fire now, Gale having left to go with her mysterious admirer, but now only Tracy's battered typewriter case was left to mark that she had existed at all. Some of the others were beginning to squirm, but instead of lingering, the music began to fade almost at once, making a couple of them jerk quietly as they sat down. One of them had been Janet, all three of the women sleeping close enough to each other for some semblance of protection, and as Liz settled back in, she found herself feeling torn about the absence of her mysterious new friend. Ben was upset the next day, enraged by the loss of Gale, and the others stuck close to camp that day. A light rain had blown in, and they seemed content to fix the boat tarp they had taken off the lifeboat to keep the worst of the rain off the fire. They huddled underneath it, shivering as the storm pattered around them. Ben stayed up late, his sleep utterly forgotten, but Liz's visitor didn't come back that night. She supposed he was full after eating so well the night before, but Liz still found her own sleep difficult. She was exhausted, unsure how much longer she could do this, and as she drifted off, she wondered who would be missing in the morning. When Janet's hand slid out of hers, Liz sat up in time to watch her walk out into the rain. The singing was getting farther away already, and when she looked at Ben, she found that he was snoring in the sand after tumbling off the log he'd been sitting on. Liz went after her friend before she could think better of it, and the rain was cold on her face as she moved out into the darkness. It didn't seem to affect Janet at all, and as Liz pulled at her to get her attention, it was like pulling on a stone. She strained at her, looping her legs around her as she tried to trip her up, but Janet's eyes were set as she made her way into the woods. Janet pulled her into the jungle, the two still struggling, and Liz could see those red eyes burning into the depths of her from the woods. "Stop it!" she yelled, tears mingling with the rain and sliding down her face. "Don't take her! She's my friend!" There was silence in the jungle, broken only by the falling of the rain as it hit the thick fronds of the trees. It was almost too loud for her to hear when he spoke, but it was just loud enough to reach her as he slipped into the wet blackness of the surrounding jungle. "Sorry, it's my nature," said the scorpion to the frog. She was left to ponder that as the rain soaked her to the bone, leaving her confused and apprehensive. Maria wrapped Liz in a hug when she came back, the camp awake and holding torches. They had spears too, even Gregory, and Ben pressed one into Liz's hand as Maria let her go. His eyes mistrusted her, but were resolved. He was clearly suspicious of her, but with only 6 of them remaining, he was forced to put his misgivings aside. "We're going after it," he said. And as her eyes grew wide, Ben smiled knowingly. "That's right. I've seen it too. I saw it tonight as you tried to drag your friend back, and I've seen it lurking around the camp more than once. I'm still not sure it's the thing that's taken people, but at this point, I don't much care. We're gonna find it. We're gonna kill it before it kills us." Liz wanted to deny him, wanted to scream at him, wanted to stab the spear into him and make him shut up, but instead, she fell in with Maria and let him lead her into the semi-darkness. She felt claustrophobic as they made their way into the jungle. Ben had no clue where he was going, but as the sun rose over the horizon, he kept them moving as their torches burned low and their clothes clung to them. They had set out with bellies full of fire, determined to find this thing. They crisscrossed the island, the sun dispelling the shadows as they moved, but they never seemed to find anything that could make a good hiding spot for anything bigger than a bird or a badger. The longer they searched, the more frantic Ben seemed to become. "Where are you?" he kept whispering. looking around frantically as he stalked the groves. "It has to be here somewhere." His need to find the creature seemed insatiable, but by noon, Ben was forced to admit that he had no idea what he was doing. The group was tired and hungry, their legs hurting and the fire in them now quenched by the mist as they turned back towards the campsite. Ben seemed completely demoralized. Catherine finally put a hand on his shoulder, reminding him that they were exhausted and needed to eat, and he was finally forced to turn around and head back to camp. They had covered the whole island, beach to beach, and found no sign of Janet or anyone else. As they trudged back, Ben wasn't the only one looking downtrodden. They all knew that come morning, they would likely be 5 instead of 6. Liz sat by the fire now, remembering the last few days with sobering clarity. Ben had been taken next. He had tried to stay up and keep watch, wanting to catch this thing so he could keep them safe from it. But in the end, he had succumbed and fallen asleep. They had all been so tired after trudging through the jungle, but when they woke up, he was already gone. Kathy was next, and Gregory's cries had brought the rest of them around the next morning. By then, the 4 of them had been frantic. No one wanted to be next, but it seemed inevitable. They were all tired, their meals growing smaller as their numbers dwindled, and they were utterly trapped by the island they now found themselves on. They couldn't fight him. They couldn't escape him. They were nothing but cattle, just waiting for the slaughter. Catherine went next, but by then, Liz already thought she knew what she had to do. When he returned the following night, she was waiting for him. He seemed confused when he found her awake, Maria and Gregory snoring around her, and when she put a finger to her lips, his nod made her stomach churn. "What will you do when they're all gone?" she asked, watching the fire dance between them as the mist made it hiss. He didn't answer her, his red eyes boring into her as he hunkered and watched. "You seem to be saving me for last. Do you hate me so much that you'd make me watch the people I care about disappear before it's my turn?" "Never," he blurted, and she shushed him as Gregory stirred. "I would never torture you like that. It's only that I can't bring myself to hurt you. I need to eat to survive, but I hate that it must come at the expense of you." They pondered this for a moment, the fire hissing and spitting like an angry cat. "What if I went with you now? Would you let these 2 go and take me?" He was silent, but his nod was all the answer she needed. "Lift the mist and let them go, and I'll go with you." He seemed startled. I can't promise your safety. It's hard for me to control my hunger, as you've seen. I'm not sure I could forgive myself if I hurt you. I'm sure you'll have no trouble calling more boats here, just like you did to ours, right?" The eyes looked away sheepishly, but he didn't bother to deny it. "How did you know?" "I guessed. Just like I guessed that this ring might be stopping your song from calling me away at night. Right?" He nodded again. "It won't protect you, though, if I decided to just gobble you up one day when I got hungry." "It's a chance I'll have to take," she said, getting up and walking towards him. The red eyes widened, but as she walked into the mist that surrounded him, the cold membrane encompassed her and accepted her. Liz felt conflicted as she watched the boat leave with Maria and Gregory. The sound of the deep whistle had brought the 2 around as the sun rode high in the morning, and Maria had called her name for quite a while before leaving with the boy. The ship had seen the messages on the beach, seen the smoke from their fires, and Liz had been afraid that Maria wouldn't go for a minute. As the boat grew smaller and smaller on the horizon, a part of Liz wished she was on it. Another part had already accepted that this was her new home, as certain as she was that she belonged with the man whose strange hand now clutched at hers. As strange as it sounded, this had been the trip she wanted. Her old life seemed so dull now. Harold and her children had already started to fade as she stood beside this strange creature. As she turned to look at him, she wondered if she would become like him one day. Maybe he had been like her once, before being discovered by something like him. Maybe he had left a life like hers behind, sacrificing everything because it felt right. Regardless, this was her home now, and as she turned to look at him, she felt complete in a way that she had never felt before.
It's true what they say. The company you bring on a retreat really does make all the difference. Let's move on from a tropical getaway to something a little more mundane, like laundry. Let's hear a story about something with a particular interest, something that took our socks.
I shouldn't have cared so much. They were just socks after all. But it was becoming such a problem. We moved into our house about 3 months ago, our first real house. I honestly thought this was going to be a fresh start for my wife, my daughter, and I. We've been bumping around from place to place since Lisa was born, and we'd lived in a new home every year since she was a year old. It had nothing to do with our landlords or rowdy neighbors or paranormal happenings, as is often the case in these kind of stories. Her mother and I simply kept getting better jobs, which required us to move from one side of town to the other for work. That kind of moving made it hard for Lisa to make any friends or feel comfortable in any place she knew, since she knew she just had to pack up and leave again soon. After 8 years of moving around and never fully unpacking, my wife and I gained some level of job stability. I was a junior VP with the company I worked at, and my wife had become a manager at the store where she worked. This meant the money was steady, the job was consistent. We decided it was time for something a little more permanent. We started house hunting right away, and after a few weeks, we stumbled across what we thought was our dream home. It was less than 30 minutes from both my office and her store, a bus ride away from school for our daughter, positioned out of town so as not to deal with the constant noise of the big city, and a big backyard with plenty of room for our growing family. As I look back on it now, I never would have expected what came next. We'd been in the house for less than a week when I first started noticing the socks were missing. "Honey, have you seen my black dress socks?" I was standing in the laundry room, looking into the dryer like I expected my missing sock to just appear out of thin air. My wife walked onto our back porch to see what I was talking about, her bathrobe replaced with a work uniform. I should have left for work 10 minutes ago. I would miss my carpool at this rate. But there I stood with one sock on and one bare foot. I had searched under, around, and on top of the dryer for the missing sock, and had finally started looking into the empty dryer like an utter fool. My wife said she hadn't seen it, but wondered if I'd seen the fluffy pink socks she liked to wear to work. "I'm missing the left one," she said good-naturedly, but I could tell she wasn't pleased about it. We both shrugged it off at the time. We had just moved in, and there were still boxes to unpack. We figured our socks had just gotten lost in the shuffle. As the first month went on, however, and the boxes slowly became less and less, we found it off-putting that we hadn't seen any of our missing socks. Quite the contrary. I was now missing 12 socks out of 15 pairs that I owned. This wasn't such a huge deal for me. I owned 15 pairs of business dress socks that went with my suits, and I could easily match them together. My wife, on the other hand, was fuming because she was missing some of the cute socks she liked to wear to work. Not just our socks. Lisa's socks were missing too. Not to mention that Lisa hadn't been sleeping well since we moved into the new house. Since the first night, she'd been woken up in the wee hours of the morning by a strange noise outside our window. She never saw what made the noise. It never poked a grisly maw up over the windowsill to scare her, but she said it sounded like fingernails scratching along the side of the house. I went and looked, too, and there were definitely scratch marks on the bricks outside her window. They were going up towards the kitchen, and maybe towards the laundry room. I put it off at the time, and made a note to trim the tree branches the next time I was doing yard work. We had quite a few large oaks in the backyard, and their branches did hang pretty low to the ground. Other than the socks and the noise, Lisa loved her new house. She had friends over to play in the big backyard and had a huge room for all her toys and games, a bathroom all to herself. She would always follow every puffy-eyed morning up with, "But I still love the house, Dad. Please don't make us move," no matter how many times I assured her that this was our house now and we weren't going anywhere. Sitting in the bedroom now with all of them clustered around me, I don't know if I still feel that way or not. About a month ago, the activity started to escalate. It was the holiday rush for the company I worked for. October, November, and December are big advertising months. I was working later than usual these days to meet my deadline. I had been dozing at my desk, and I jumped one evening as the phone rang, not even realize what time it was. I looked at the clock and gasped when I realized it was almost 8:30. That would be Maggie, I thought, calling to make sure I was okay. Lisa would be in bed already, and Maggie would call to see if she needed to wait up for me or go to bed. Her store was experiencing the same holiday blitz as mine, and she would most likely relish the idea of rolling into unconsciousness until the alarm went off again. I caught the phone on the third ring. "Hello? David, please, I need you to come home now." It was Maggie, but she sounded funny. Not funny ha-ha, but funny scared. She was whispering into the phone, and in the background I could hear someone crying. I guessed that it must be Lisa. The two were likely in the bedroom, the farthest room in the house from anything, with the door locked and the windows drawn. "Maggie, what's going on?" There's something on the back porch," she whispered. "Something big. David, I need you to come home. I think it might be a prowler." "Okay, Maggie, I'm on my way. You two just sit tight, okay?" I had already grabbed my briefcase and my coat and was heading out the door. I made the 23-minute drive in 10 minutes, and I was lucky I didn't see a single police officer. As I pulled into the front yard, I popped the trunk and took out one of the golf clubs I'd had in there since my last golfing trip. It was a big old sturdy driver, and I felt sure that it would be a force to be reckoned with, unless the prowler had a gun, of course. I moved around the side of the house, keeping my back against the wall as I went, and when I got to the back porch, I listened for the sound of something moving around. I'd put a heavy deadbolt on the door leading from the house to the back porch, and I was pretty confident that it was still on. As I listened, I heard something, and I tensed as I cranked my senses up to 11. It was a scuttling sound, like claws on asphalt, but it was also a weird sort of gloopy sound that was barely audible over the scraping and the clawing feet. I relaxed a bit, thinking it was probably just a raccoon or a possum, and stepped around the corner as I threw open the door and brandished the club. I expected to find an animal, a startled animal that would hiss and run away, but I was unprepared for what awaited me as I threw open the screen door and stepped out on the back porch. Nothing. There was nothing on my back porch, except for the storage boxes we kept out there and the washer and dryer. I looked around, moving the washer and dryer to see if anything had clawed its way behind it, but there was nothing to be found except some scrape marks on the tile. I decided there was a hole somewhere that a critter was getting in through. Upon further investigation, I discovered that the silver tube that hooked the dryer to the outflow was knocked off. I secured it and locked the screen door and went around to the front door to let my wife know that it was just a raccoon or something. She was far from satisfied with this explanation. "It sounded way bigger than a raccoon, David. I'm sure I heard something out there. There are noises that Lisa keeps hearing, too. What if it's some pervert who's stealing our socks?" "Socks? Is that something that people really got off on?" I asked. She wasn't amused. "I'm serious, David. I want you to do something about this." So I did. I called a contractor and had him come look at the back porch. He couldn't find any way that something could be coming in, but he said he'd pest seal all the exit holes and suggested that I call a pest control company to put out some repellent and keep the critters away. I thought maybe this would stop the problem, but it only seemed to escalate it. Socks began missing at an alarming rate. 3 pairs in one night, 4 pairs in one night. By the end of the month, we'd be through 4 packs of dress socks. Maggie was putting a lot of pressure on me to solve this problem. I was getting angry. My work was beginning to suffer for lack of sleep and lack of focus. 2 days ago, I finally had enough. When I came home to find my sleep-deprived wife dozing on the back porch, all her laundry done during the day now, and having to sit with it to keep it safe, I knew something had to give. I took a week off work, citing stress at home and a need for rest. I staked out the back porch. I had purchased a jumbo-sized packing box, big enough for me to sit in and stake out the back porch to catch whatever was doing this. I was no longer convinced it was a critter, and the fact that everything was reset back the way I had left it in the morning told me it was a devious individual with a lot of experience at this particular pastime. I set up the box and put some snacks, some water bottles, and a gun that I had bought just for the occasion in one corner. I made myself comfortable, as comfortable as you can in a huge box, I guess, and settled in for the night with my phone out and my energy shots close at hand. I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up, it was to the sound of scrabbly claws again. I peeked out from the box, expecting to see an animal or maybe a weird little man with a sack and a mask like in the manga I had read as a kid. But I did not expect to find what I found out there. My cell phone light shook as the creature came into focus. It was amorphous, like an oozing potato, with 6 long human-like arms coming out of its body. Each arm ended in a hand, and each hand ended in a finger. And each of the 6 fingers each had a little hand that were tipped with long, dirty nails. This was the sound I'd been hearing, the creature scuttling along on its long, dirty nails as it clicked across the back porch. It didn't see me right away. It had its head in the dryer. When it came out, I could see a smooth and bloated head with no neck and a snarl of long, greasy black hair that looked like a wig. It held one of my daughter's socks in a 7th and 8th pair of hands. As it looked at it through watery black eyes, it reached into its body with the other hand and pulled out something. It pulled out what looked like a baby. It looked like an amorphous potato baby that squalled in a soft little gloopy way and waved feebly with its 8 stumpy arms. The creature took the sock and stretched the neck of it out before it placed the squalling thing inside it. The baby stopped glooping at once, making some watery burbles as the creature slid it back into its flesh. And as the creature turned to go, it finally caught sight of me. I saw it scamper towards the back of the dryer, somehow condensing itself to slip in and out again. As it pushed itself into that pipe, it finally saw my flashlight, and I saw the skinned back, 2 large jaws that dominated the front of its face. It looked like a weird Halloween mask, the ones that are a little too uncanny. It opened its mouth and made a sound like an angry river rushing up to swallow me. I shot it then. I rattled off 3 panicked shots before I could stop myself, and it stopped in its tracks and looked startled. I don't know if I hit it. I don't even know if my bullets could kill it, but I was so scared at that moment that I did the only thing my lizard brain determined was the right course of action. I ran. I flipped out of the box and ran, slamming the door behind me and throwing the bolt as something large and angry thundered against the other side. My wife was there then, pale and unsure, wanting to know what had happened. I turned her around and grabbed Lisa as she came sleepily up the hall. I pulled them all in the direction of the bedroom and locked the door behind us, pushing the chest of drawers in front of it. The police have come and gone now. I called 911 before I started writing this, but they couldn't find anything on the back porch. The officers figured that maybe a bear wandered up or something. They're supposed to be hibernating, but it happens sometimes. Their only real question was how it had gotten out without dropping a single drop of blood after being shot. The back porch is a disaster. It certainly wasn't worried about keeping a low profile this time. The police gave me the number to animal control and told me to call in the morning so they could have a look for the wounded bear. I'm not calling animal control, though. In the morning, we're going to pack up everything dear to us and just get the hell out of here. If that thing can fit through the hole in the laundry room, I have no idea how small it can squeeze. Since the police left, I can hear something outside the windows. I can hear those dirty fingernails as they scrape along the brick walls of the house. Could it squeeze through the crack under the front door? Could it come in through a sewer pipe? My family drifted off into a shallow sleep, but I'm sitting here on the bed, gun by my knee, just listening for the sounds. It stopped scraping its claws about 5 minutes ago. I don't know if that should be comforting or not. I wish I'd just let it keep the socks.
Certainly makes mating your socks just a little bit more difficult, doesn't it? Moving from the laundry room into the bowels of Central America, let's hear a little folk story about a creature known as La Lechuza.
I need to tell someone about this, mostly to get it off my chest, but also because, as screwed up as the situation is, it's one of the best stories I've ever heard. I attend a large university in Arizona. I won't say which, but my friends and I were sharing a bottle of Jack the other night, and we started sharing stories. Somehow, we got on the subject of spooky stories, and it appeared that several of us had a strange occurrence to talk about. Gabriel told us about a weird apartment that he and his mother had lived in when they were in West Virginia. Apparently his mother had woken up screaming one night after a dark figure had appeared over her bed. He had come in and found it melting away into nothing, and the two of them had moved out shortly thereafter. John told us about a weird deer he'd seen on a hunting trip, and I told him about a sound I'd heard outside my parents' house in Montana throughout my childhood. One of Dad's friends, he was a zoologist or something, said it didn't sound like any animal he was familiar with. Dad jokingly asked him if it was a Bigfoot or something. He never really quite denied it. He got spooky quiet and just said he wouldn't be caught out dead in the woods, especially not after dark. We never went camping out there anymore, but we certainly never went past the property line either after dark. Passed the bottle to Samuel, and for once, he actually took a sip. Samuel, or Sam for short, had been living in the dorm since before we'd arrived at university. He was in his third year and was studying engineering as he worked towards a bachelor's degree. He had told us several stories about growing up in a small town in Mexico and how his uncle was thanks to his current status as a student. His uncle was a professor of Spanish studies and antiquities, and he had offered to help his nephew get a student visa so he could do more than drink shitty beer in the local bar and do manual labor his whole life. I opened up saying that it was weird to see Samuel drink, but I don't think you understand how strange it was. Samuel was our permanent designated driver because in the 2 years that we'd known him, I had never so much as seen him touch a bottle of alcohol, unless it was to throw it away or take it from us when we had enough. He took a moment to collect his thoughts before saying in a hollow voice, "I told you all I grew up in Mexico, right?" We all nodded, and he continued, "Well, I grew up in this rural little town right outside of Hermosillo. It wasn't large, maybe 8,000 people in the whole town, and most of our work came from the processing plant or from the farms that operated around the small town. My mother and I lived there with my abuelo and my abuela. My uncle was living in America and sending money back when he could. My abuelo was a horse breeder, something my family had practiced for generations, and he would work for the stockman for one of the larger ranches in the area. We weren't quite as well off as the rancher, but we were doing okay. Wasn't a bad life. It was hard, but not without its pleasures. When I was in high school, my friends and I would go to parties held at the local farms. The rancher's son, Santiago, and I had been friends since we were young, and we palled around with some of the ranch hand sons, Juan, Christopher, and Mateo. We were good friends, probably the best friends I've ever had, but one night we found something that none of us quite believed in. We had all grown up with stories about La Llorona or El Cibon, but my mother always loved to use a certain legend to scare me. La Lechuza was a witch who turned herself into some sort of owl demon after her death. She was said to roam the lands, hunting for drunks or just children out after dark. She would make noises in the night to trick you into opening your window so she could steal your eyes. She would pretend to be a baby to lure you into the woods. She would create thunderstorms and other nasty things and would come to get naughty children if they acted out. La Lechuza was used a lot in my house to get me to do things like chores or homework that I really didn't want to do. By the time I was a teenager, though, I was kind of done with my mom's scary stories about owl ladies. I was much more interested in drinking with my friends and meeting girls. I was 16 when she caught me on my way out the door. "I know where you're going off to. I beg you, do not go out there and drink with your friends." I brushed her off, saying I was of age, and if I wanted to go hang out with my friends, then I would. And if La Lechuza would happen across you in your group,
I scoffed, telling her that her stories didn't scare me anymore. That story is what killed your father, she started to say, but I cut her off. Dad had died in a drunk driving accident before I was born. He had driven off the road and hit a tree, his car erupting into a ball of flame, and that's why we had nothing to bury. But Mom had insisted that it had been La Lechuza who had driven him off the road. This had made me even scarier of the creature when I was a kid, but now it made me mad that she would use my father's death like this. I left without another word, climbing into Santiago's car as it pulled away from my house for the last time. She was standing in the road crying as we drove off. That image will be scarred into my brain until the day I die. We were out late. I couldn't tell you much about the party, just that it was in someone's barn. The beer was hot, the women were lukewarm, and the music was subpar at best. I drank too much, trying to get the fight with my mom out of my head, and by the time we called it a night, I was well and truly drunk. We climbed into Santiago's car, all of us laughing and tipsy. We started out, Santiago managing to keep it on the road as we whooped and hollered in the back seat. He was laughing along with us, turning the music up on the radio, but when he swerved suddenly, we all screamed like banshees. He hauled us back on the road, Mateo opening the window to vomit, and I leaned up as I asked him what was wrong. He looked pale, all the tipsy scared out of him as he stammered, I thought there was an old lady in the road, but when she turned, her body looked wrong. I said how weird it was to see someone so old out this late, but suddenly I yelled for him to look. Something was in the road, and if it was what he had seen before, he had been absolutely right. It was hunched over, a long cloak on its shoulders, and it looked deformed. It turned to look at the car as it barreled forward, and I could see piercing red eyes that bore into my soul. I saw it all in the space of 5 seconds, maybe, but those eyes will stay with me forever. Santiago never had a chance to do anything. He just plowed right into her, doing 55. The car suddenly stopped dead, and I came to about a minute later. I had boffed my head pretty good on the seat, but one look at Santiago told me I had gotten off lucky. He had slammed into the windshield, breaking his neck and turning his skull into a rotten gourd. The others seemed to be okay, but the car was smoking, and we climbed out as we assessed the damage. The whole front end was smashed in like we'd hit a tree or a big rock, but nothing was in the road to be hit. I remembered the old lady and moved off to check the ditches, thinking maybe we had knocked her off the road. The others just milled about, not sure what to do, and that's when it happened. The moon was full that night, or I may very well have missed it. A shadow passed over me, a thing with a wingspan like a condor, and I looked up just in time to see it drop onto my friends as they stood huddled around the car. It had landed on Juan, breaking his back and riding him to the ground. He screamed, watery and miserable. He wouldn't scream for long, though. The bird dropped its head and began to feed on him, its beak plunging and diving as the other two backed away in horror. When it looked up, face dripping blood and owl eyes glaring at me, I ran. I don't know if the other two ran at the time, but I felt like a mouse who'd seen an owl. I ran, still drunk and weaving, and the houses swam up in my peripherals. I could still hear that wet, crunching sound as the creature fed, and I stumbled as my feet hit a root. I kept running, kept moving, kept showing my heels as the houses wobbled like an oil painting all around me. I just kept running, knowing that my house couldn't be far, not noticing the lack of night sounds until it was too late. When that unearthly screech split the night, I panicked and turned a corner at random. When my foot hit a pothole, I thought for sure I was going to die. My world suddenly exploded with light, and I stumbled back on my hands and butt as a bright something nearly blinded me. I turned, putting my back to those blinding lights, and saw a horror as it descended. The headlights spotlighted the owl thing, and as it swooped down on me, I figured this was the end. I closed my eyes and put my hands up across my face, preparing for the end. That's when I heard my mom yelling at the thing. She came out of the car, shouting curses and brandishing a cross on a long silver chain. The owl monster flapped its wings, changing its course and taking off again. It screeched loudly, flapping those wings angrily as it flew away. My mother helped me into the car then, but I must have passed out, because I woke up in my bed the next morning. I would have believed it was a dream if Mom hadn't told me all about it as we sat at the breakfast table. She had made food, and there was a pot of coffee there as well. As I ate, she told me all of it. How the creature had killed my dad one night as he drove home drunk. How Santiago and Juan had been found dead that morning. How my other friends had never arrived home that night. She spelled it out for me and told me how lucky I was to be alive. She said I had been given a chance and that it was up to me to figure out how to use it. She wasn't happy with my answer after I'd thought about it for a few days, but I think she understood. I still went to those parties, but I never drank again. Instead, I helped people get home safely. I never saw that creature again, but there were nights that I imagined I could feel its hateful stare. I was taking its prey from it, stealing its food, and it never quite forgave me for that. Not a day goes by that I don't think about that night and my friends who died. We sat there, drinking as we listened to his story, a cold chill flowing through us as we took it all in. I'd say this was the end, but that wouldn't do him or his story justice. 3 weeks ago, Samuel came to me in tears and told me that his mother was going to die. I sat him down. He was shaking like a leaf, and asked him how he could possibly know that. Before that, I hadn't seen him in class in a few days, and he looked tired and rattled. I dreamed I was in my mother's house, the one she has on my grandparents' property, and I heard her crying. I walked into the living room, and she was sitting at the kitchen table. I walked up behind her, putting a hand on her shoulder, and asked her what was wrong. She grabbed my arm, and her hand had become a claw. Her head turned around, and she screeched at me through that owl beak. Her face had become that of the owl witch, and just before I woke up, she screamed my mother's name. I asked him what that meant, and he said, "Some people say that seeing her in a dream means that someone you love will die. She screamed my mother's name. I can't ignore that." 3 days later, he told me he was returning home for his mother's funeral. They found her in her room. She'd had a heart attack. I need to go home and say goodbye. Will you watch my plants while I'm away? I told him I would, but I think he knew he wasn't coming back. A week ago, I asked his uncle if there was any news. His uncle only sighed and told me that his nephew was missing. My mother tells me that he went to the house he and his mother had shared. No one has seen him since. We don't know where he is, but if you're still watering his plants, I'll pick them up this afternoon. Hopefully, I can give them to him when he comes back. I don't know what became of Sam, but I pray that the owl witch, La Lechuza, did not get him.
One more story for you, and I think I've kept a pretty good one for last. Of all the terrible things about monsters, there's one thing that stands above the rest for me. Something that I think you'll come to realize once you hear this story. Let's finish off strong with a tale about Lady Dragora.
I was speechless when she sent me the message. Even her text looked sexy in the pink curly writing she used. It was short and sweet and to the point, but it still filled my chest with a tightness that wouldn't go away. At the time, it was a dream come true. Meet me at the Hotel Aries at 11 p.m. Don't be late. I couldn't believe this was happening. Tonight, I would meet with Lady Dragora. I guess you could say I have a slight problem with weird fetishes. I discovered pornography when I was young, like most people I know. I was 12, I was horny, and someone I knew said I could find boobs online if I looked. I dived headfirst into a well I don't think I really understood the depths of. It started with generic stuff, naked photos, short clips from films, and led to my current level of kink. I started slow, it was the 90s after all, and internet connections were not what they would become. I have waited all day for a single picture to load, only to be disappointed when the phone rang and everything was lost. Most of my early burgeonings were done in chat rooms, in the steamy squares of private messages. With both of my parents away at work, I was on the computer every day after school. I didn't discover my proclivity for vor until I was in college. when you've been cruising the web for as long as I have, you eventually find yourself into some offbeat stuff. You can't experience that much depravity and not be changed fundamentally, and I was no different. I had recently grown bored with my selection of smut and went looking for something different. When I found Vor, though, I knew I had found something special. Vor, if you're unfamiliar, is a fetish that centers around eating or being eaten by something. In the community of niche communities, Vor is pretty niche. I belong to several online communities where we discuss the acts and the aftermath and trade images online. But I only know a few people in my area who are into it. We meet up once a week to have coffee and gush over our favorite Vor videos and whatnot, and gush over our local legend, Lady Dragora. Lady Dragora was a legend in the Vor scene. She had a subreddit devoted to her videos, a Snapchat full of fans who hungered for her next performance, and a legion of fans willing to pay exorbitant fees for her live shows and recordings. She wouldn't tell people her age, but most of us guess she's in her 30s. She has this long, dark hair that falls in straight waves of ebony silk, and her eyes hold the slight hint of some Asian parentage, maybe. She's beautiful, she's exotic, and she was a total sadist. Lady Dragora made the kind of videos that were illegal everywhere. She made the sort of videos that came with a price tag payable in cryptocurrency. I had seen other so-called Vor videos before her, but many were obviously fake, obviously staged, or obviously CGI. People would eat mice only to have a jump cut before they started chewing. They would dangle CGI mice over their gaping maws. They would pretend to eat things or eat things they were pretending were alive. And after a while, it just becomes a little old. Her videos were something different. The first video I ever saw involved her eating a rat the size of her hand. The video opened on a terrarium full of squirming rats, not mice, sewer rats. And as she approached the tank, they all began to go wild. They ran over the top of each other, squealing in pure terror. It was as though they sensed a bigger predator coming and wanted to be sure her eyes didn't fall on them. She was dressed in what would become her signature black bodice, garters, black choker, black elbow-length gloves, and long leather knee-high boots. Some videos seemed to require music laid over the top, but not hers. When she reached inside the tank, you could hear the rats screaming and flailing inside as they tried desperately to avoid her hand. She selected one of them and pulled him out with a gloved hand. The rat squirmed and kicked, visibly distressed by her, but she paid him no mind. She replaced the lid and walked away from the tank with the screaming rodent. Their cries were high-pitched, almost pig-like, and you could hear them off camera in low waves. The video cut to her, holding the rat up to the camera, still squirming and biting as it struggled to free itself. She held it too tight in her clenched fist, and its fur seemed to boil around that fist like water overflowing a glass. I expected a jump cut when she opened her mouth and leaned over the rat's head. It screamed pitifully as her teeth encircled its writhing head. He bit at her, lashing out with those sharp teeth, but if she felt it, she seemed not to notice. It spasmed as her teeth began to close around its head, and I watched, thinking to myself that the jump cut would be any minute now. This will be when the video jags, and her teeth will close around a plastic rat. She'll be just another pretender, just another charlatan, just another... The blood flowed out as the rat made its final scream. Her teeth sank into it and tore at its skin. When she came away, she was chewing, and the rat's body twitched in her hand as she ate. The twitching stopped before she went back for another bite, but the blood made a macabre sort of fountain as it ran down her gloved fingers and pattered to the floor. She ate the whole rat, one bite at a time, bones and all, and as the tail disappeared down her throat, I was hooked. I'd probably watched about a dozen of her videos before I dared to show anyone. Sometimes she bit, which was hot, but sometimes it seemed that she would just swallow whatever she was eating whole. She'd worry it down with very little difficulty, her throat bulging as whatever it was slid down, and to me, that was more erotic than the chewing. It wasn't just rodents either. Eels, mice, more rats, chicks, they all went down her throat, while my friends and I paid $79.99 a video. 2 months ago, she put a small camera on a mouse and swallowed it whole while videoing its descent into her stomach. The camera must have cost her quite a bit. Between the size of the camera, the night vision interface, and the video's price, I knew it wouldn't be something we could expect often. The footage changed the way I'd viewed my fetish. Watching something struggle in her stomach, watching its final moments, was far more intimate than watching her swallow it whole. I told her as much on the comment section of her website. I spilled my guts to her, hoping to impress her, and somehow it worked. I wish I knew what would come of that stupid comment. I was shocked when she responded. I'd been sitting at the coffee bar with the other members of our group, Doug and Matt and David. We were all discussing the latest video by Lady D when my phone chirped loudly. I looked down to check it and saw a banner informing me that Lady Dragora has responded to your comment. I almost spewed hot coffee on Doug before opening the message and reading what she'd written. The guys leaned in close, wondering what I'd seen to garner such attention, and when he saw the sender, he too almost spit coffee in surprise. I opened her message, and it said 8 short words. How profound. I would love to chat sometime. Dave whistled through his teeth. Wow, she rarely talks to fans. You're in, man. And so I was. As they sat crowded around me, I answered her, and she immediately began our strange correspondence. I didn't question it at the time, but the speed with which she picked up our conversations should have triggered a red flag or two. It was as though she were just waiting for me to respond, waiting for her prey to wander into her field of influence so she could snap the trap shut and watch it squirm. For 3 months, we chatted almost every day. We talked about everything. Music, food, the usual getting-to-know-you stuff. We eventually made it to topics that were a little more personal. It turned out that she held some strange beliefs about life force, believed that consuming the flesh of living creatures would give her their life force and extend her own life somehow. I asked her if she'd ever eaten human flesh, but she just joked that maybe I'd find out someday and danced around the subject. The more I talked to her, the more I became certain that she had traveled much and knew things that I could only guess at. She spoke about distant places and strange customs. If I hadn't been so enchanted by the attention of a celebrity, I might have seen the numerous red flags she was putting up. She talked a lot about places you didn't see on the Travel Channel, sites that didn't have names you could scrawl across a map, locations both ancient and remote. A month ago, she asked me if I would roleplay with her. I agreed, of course, because I was hooked on her attention. Even in my haze of glamour, though, I knew there was something a little off. Her persona was that of a large reptile, and mine was always of some prey animal fit only for ingestion. She would describe my end, my passing between large and ancient lips, and my slow descent towards the transition into nutrition. I would describe my struggles, my vain attempts at escape, but she would always catch me and describe in loving detail my demise at her jaws. I loved it. After all, this was my thing, and I often walked away from our sessions with a bounce in my step. People probably had a hard time understanding how someone achieves satisfaction at the idea of being devoured, but to me, it was no different than any other obsession. We would roleplay twice a week, her scenarios and story threads becoming darker as they went, and before long, she wasn't just swallowing me whole, but tearing into me and getting a little violent. I was less on board with these instances. Imagining myself going through these pains were never my thing, but she always smoothed it over with personalized videos or custom works just for me. She made me feel special, made me feel accepted, and that's what made it easy to draw me in. This was also when I was approached by Justin. His screen name was Furrylocks on the board in question. Until he messaged me, I'd never even heard of him.
though it seemed we moved in similar circles. My only correspondence with him was a message left in my inbox one morning. It was hastily written, full of spelling errors, and intrigued me to no end. I read it twice before class, and when I showed it to my friends in the Vor group, they brushed it off as a jealous fan. His message was not long, but it did make me question some rumors I'd heard on some of the other boards. It read, "You don't know me. My name is Justin. I understand that you've become close with an internet personality known as Lady Dragora. I don't know how much you know about her, but she may or may not be 100% what she seems to be. I had a friend whom I'd known since grade school. He caught the attention of the lady, and it was the happiest I'd ever seen him. Their relationship was brief, a month or two. Then one night, he told me she'd invited him to her hotel room. I didn't think anything of it until he didn't respond to my calls or texts for 2 days. He's been missing for 3 months now, and your new lady friend has either blocked me or refused to respond to any of my messages. I'm not trying to turn you away from your current relationship, whatever that might entail. I'm simply trying to warn you to be on your guard." I was hesitant to respond. It seemed better to just ignore him. But after a particularly grisly RP session a week later, I decided to message him and get some information. I was still very much under her spell, but some of our conversations had made me wary. After all, she was still a stranger on the internet. Growing up at an age of stranger danger, I was very wary of people online pretending to be someone they weren't, a collection of online videos or not. However, my message was never opened, never read, and when the invitation to her hotel room came across my box, I decided to put my fears aside and go for it. That's how I came to be in her hotel room at 11 p.m. She sent me the text around 6 in the afternoon. "Meet me at the Hotel Aries at 11 p.m. Don't be late," was all it said, but it was enough to get my blood running hot. The Hotel Aries was not a huge hotel, but it was one of the largest in this part of Chicago. The borough of Chicago was an hour from campus, but I drove the distance gladly. If she told me to drive to New York that night, I'd have done it. And with the invitation being so close to home, I decided I would be a fool not to accept. I told my friends from the coffee shop where I was going. They told me to take some video and let me know when they got home. I set out for the hotel in high spirits, my mind flooded with possibilities. I had arrived early, 2 hours early, hoping that maybe we could have a meal before whatever was going to happen tonight. I inquired at the front desk, and the man behind the counter gave me a knowing little smile as he slid the keycard across to me. "She's gone out for a little while, but she mentioned that she likely had a guest coming tonight." "Have fun," he said. I started up to the elevator, wondering how often he'd had to do this for her. How often did she have guests? I took the elevator up to the penthouse and found a lavish one-bedroom suite decked out in rich fabrics and expensive furniture. I recognized it as the backdrop for many of her videos and found a camera already set up in the corner. She had left me a note, too, telling me to make myself at home and that she would be back at 11. The waiting was nerve-wracking. I took a seat on her luxurious couch and just sat there. My mind raced, going over possibilities and scenarios and making me a nervous wreck of anticipation. When the elevator finally came up to the penthouse, I felt a surge of excitement that my patience might finally pay off. She was framed in the elevator door as they opened, and it was the first time I'd ever met her in person. She wore a long tan coat and the same black boots she'd worn in her videos. Her shiny black hair was pulled back into its accustomed tail. As she stepped off the elevator, she let her coat puddle on the floor, and I could see her familiar black corset. She smiled when she saw me, and as I rose to greet her, she held out a finger, indicating me to stand and be quiet. She circled me, drinking me in with her eyes. The hungry way she looked at me made me both incredibly aroused and extremely uncomfortable. She was looking at me the way I look at a particularly tasty meal. Though this was certainly what I wanted, I had never seen someone look at another person that way before. She didn't say a word, just walked over to the camera and pointed it towards me. As she turned, I saw the red light was on. Looked like I was going to be in one of her movies tonight. "Don't worry," she said, her voice hinting at foreign places and exotic locales. "This is just for me. I'd never post anything online without your consent. I
smiled at her and started to disrobe, but she stopped me with a delicate finger. "Leave them on. I like to handle the clothes myself." She stepped away from me then, eyes smoldering as she held me in her gaze, and then something happened. If you've ever seen one of those old werewolf movies, the kind where their whole body shifts in a rapid and sudden transformation, then you may have some idea of what I saw. If not, I'll try to explain it as best I can. Her body seemed to ripple, her whole form shuddering like an image in a pond, and suddenly there was something else in front of me. Her body was a long mass of jade scales towering 12 feet high. As it reached its full height, it had to crouch to avoid hitting the ceiling, but this seemed to suit it just fine. It crouched to eye level, its spade-shaped head hovering inches from my body, and I realized that its eyes, those vast and hovering pools of death, were the same as hers. I was trapped by those eyes, like a bird before the snake, and when she struck, I never even had a chance to run. If you're reading this, then your next question must be, how am I even writing this? Being eaten is normally where the story like this would end, but unfortunately for me, it's not. Lady Dragora, that queen serpent of myth, has been dining on humans for a very long time, it would seem. She neither bit nor tore me. Instead, she struck with a precision born of years of practice and swallowed me whole with little effort. As I slid down her throat, I felt the slimy walls caress me and the suffocating darkness inviting me towards terror. She had let me keep my phone, however, and as I wiggled to get it, I could feel a new sensation coursing through the giant muscles that were her body, the squirming desire for more. That's when I realized what she wanted. She doesn't want a quick meal. She doesn't want a satisfying feed. She wants a terrified body to thrash and scream as her body does what it does best. She wants my last few hours to be her pleasure. So I've been sitting as still as I can for the last hour of my life, writing this message to the outside world. I've sent a copy to my friends at the coffee shop, a copy to the Chicago police, and I've posted a copy here, hoping that someone will read this and take it seriously. I now know what happened to Justin's missing friend, what likely happened to Justin himself, and the fate that awaits me at the end of my life. I want my death to be the last, though, so if you read this and you see her, don't fall for her games. Don't let yourself be another meal for Lady Dragora.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't feel too bad about it. I'm sure we'll see each other again very soon, here on Cozy Horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.